All right. Yeah, I'm doing a Warden build. Most of the time, you only really see Nightblade builds on my channel. Nightblade is what I excel at. However, I have actually been having a bunch of fun with uh, Warden, and I've done multiple versions of Warden too. So I quite like how it's working out for me. And I've done. You see, there's multiple iterations here with multiple um, different versions, and I finally settled on one that is highly effective. It also retains a certain amount of simplicity. Difference, but there's a bit to explain here. It's not you don't have to think about it that much when you're actually playing, but I want to explain it now so that you know about it and it justifies my choices for this build. In practice, when you're actually playing the game, you don't need to think about it that much. So I actually find this build to be pretty simple. Because of Warden's effectiveness at not dying, I find that I'm able to actually think more. Because I don't have to be a sweaty tryhard like I do on Magic Nightblade. So if your reflexes aren't great, or if you tend to take time to think things through more, this is probably a pretty good build for you because you won't die as quickly, and you'll still do a fair amount of damage. Now, one thing that Magical Warden struggles with is sustain. Their damage is okay, but it's not top of the pack. However, I think I found a pretty good setup, and that is Scathing Mage on your front bar. Why Scathing Mage? What is Scathing Mage? Where do you get Scathing Mage? Oh boy, have I a history lesson for you. I'm gonna make it quick though. Scathing Mage comes from Imperial City Prison, which is a DLC dungeon, although it's fairly easy to do, so even though it might be annoying to get, because it is kind of a long dungeon, it's not really hard to get, just time consuming. You want to make sure you have an ice staff on your front bar, iterate that ice staff, and you want to make sure it is charged. That is a requirement. Sure, you can get by with other things if you don't have enough transmute stones, but at some point you're going to need to charged, or else you're going to be losing a lot of effectiveness. A friend told me that having charged will make this proc chilled very often, so close to 100%, so very important to have. Moving on though, why did I choose Scathing Mage, and why do I even have Scathing Mage? It's such an obscure set. Well, back in 2017, before Morrowind even, one of the metas that you would see for Magic Nightblade was using Scathing Mage, because Twisting Path used to proc Scathing Mage. It was a coding mistake. Typically, it would not proc Scathing Mage, and it doesn't proc it anymore, but because of that, I had plenty of Scathing Mage. So I just had this sitting in the bank for what? So 17, it's 20. Fucking 6 years, Jesus Christ, I'm getting old. So I've had this sitting in the bank gathering dust for 6 years, and now finally it becomes useful, and I feel so vindicated. I'm very excited with this because I've also made it work with Sork. I may or may not make a build video for that, but because of Force Pulse, it works very well. Now, one thing you may be questioning is that, well, it has an uptime of 5 seconds, and it has a cooldown of 5 seconds. That means that, sure, theoretically, you could have almost 100% uptime. In reality, it'd probably be closer to 90 or 95% uptime, and at the very best, it would be 98. If you had, perfect RNG just because of GCDs, it would probably be 98 or 99%. So, it's not active all the time. But, let me tell you this. Actually, I should not lead with this, but I'm gonna. In PvP combat, after I look at CMX, it looks like this is active roughly 60% of the time. I shouldn't lead with this because it's a little misleading, but I also want to talk about why this statistic is misleading. Though this is only active 60% of the time, during your offensive windows, which is when it really matters, it is active roughly 80% of the time. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. It's RNG, so it varies. But having something active 80% of the time is pretty fucking good, and it offers a lot of damage. It's basically 500 extra weapon and spell damage. Rolled it out, it's like 516? I don't remember. That in combination with Rallying Cry, which is just free 300 extra weapon and spell damage, that's what, that's 800 extra weapon and spell damage. That's almost 1,000. And then you have all the multipliers from your class and all that other stuff. So that is a lot of fucking damage. Moving on, we also have Balrog, which after you ult, either with Northern Storm or Dawnbreaker, and I will talk about the merits of both of these, that's even more damage. Also, if you use Northern Storm, you get 300 more weapon and spell damage. That's a lot of fucking damage. Though I will say that Dawnbreaker, in most cases, is probably what you want to be using. I'm using a trainee chest piece, and I'm using Mark and Ring of Majesty for that extra 200, another 200 weapon and spell damage. And of course, you get a little bit of extra armor. You could use Sea Serpent's Coil. I just find this to be more consistent for my tastes, and I like consistency. So yeah, I don't like Sea Serpent's Coil. I tried it on PTS. I don't even have it on live. You'll notice I'm only using one piece of medium. The red letters indicate light and heavy, and then green is medium, blue is light. Scathing Mage is not craftable, and so customizing your equipment weight, not really. But given Magic Warden struggles with sustain, and I will talk about that further and how I alleviate that, having 4 pieces of light armor is actually pretty nice, because the cost reduction and the extra regen you get is it's kind of needed. Let's just put it that way. As for enchantments, on my head and legs, I have it as infused because I wanted to get the little extra max health and a little extra off stat and main stat. And do divines. You can do divines, well fitted, maybe in pen. I would not recommend, or infused, but only do infused on big pieces. You can also do reinforced on the chest. That is the only piece I think it's worth doing it on. So I have a gold reinforced chest piece. You'll see that most of my other armor is not actually gold, aside from like having gold jewelry is actually really nice if you're using infused. I probably will gold it out one day, but you know, that's expensive. So I'm only having a few pieces golded. The chest plate is one of them that I would gold. Keep that in mind, aside from weapons and maybe jewelry, chest plate. That. Make sure you have Balrog. You should probably do heavy on the head, which is, and medium on the shoulders, because that'll give you the most armor out of it. You could do scathing. No, that's stupid. Don't. For the traits and enchant, let's see. I'm using how many? Am I using 2 Swift? I'm using 1 Swift. So I'm using 1 piece of Swift. That is a requirement in PvP, in my mind. The 2 requirements for PvP, aside from a certain amount of, like, around 30k max health and having 1 piece of Swift. Those are my 3 requirements for doing PvP. If you're not doing that, you're going to have a hard time. There are some other more niche ones, but those are probably the 3 overarching ones. You want to have around those amounts of stats, and that'll give you a certain amount of effectiveness. Unless you're a healer, in which case you don't need penetration. You'll notice that I said 30k maximum health. This is not 30k, this is 28. I wanted to get a little extra damage, so I took out health and magicka, but as a warden, I have minor toughness. And it's up pretty often. The only time it really affects me is like if I'm getting ganked on a horse, I won't have as much max health. And I find that because I have less than 30k max health, I do get ganked on a horse a lot. People see me and go, oh shit, they don't have as much max health. They'll be easy target. And you know, sometimes I'm an easy target because if they get all their combos up, I'll die because I don't have all my buffs up. But this is my choice. I would suggest having a little bit more max health. We'll lose it on damage, but you'll also be more survivable. And hey, Warden is very survivable to begin with. All this, we have I have 1 piece of Arcane. You probably want this infused. I just haven't changed it yet. And then 1 Swift and 1 infused Magic Recovery. Very important, infused Magic Recovery. You could do a tri-stat or tri-regen if you want, or another regen glyph. Do what you need to make your build feel comfortable, but I have 2 non-infused weapon and spell damage glyphs. This will probably be an infused glyph at some point, but it is what it is. On your front bar, you want to make sure you have an Ice Staff. For Warden, Ice Staff is important. I don't care if you like lightning heavy attacks. Ice Staff is very important for Warden because of the unique passive Glacial Presence. Not the first part. Wait, no, it's not that. It's Piercing Cold. This one is very important, but I'll talk about that in a second. Increase your damage done by 2%, which increases to 12% when wielding an Ice Staff. That is great. 3 extra damage. So Ice Staff on both bars. No Lightning Staff, no Fire Staff. You could do dual wield, but this is a magic build, and I'm the magic part of it all. So this this build probably will require you to do light attack weaving. It's not as important if you're bad at weaving, or if you don't like weaving, you can skip out on the weaving. You're gonna miss out on effectiveness, but if you're okay at weaving, this will work. You don't have to be good at it, but as long as you try, you're doing better than not trying. You can also kind of do this. You can do like a heavy attack weave, in which case I would actually not do regen. I would just do another spell damage thing, because if you're just gonna do a heavy attack in between every ability, then you're just gonna have a lot of fucking sustain. So just no sustain, all damage. But I would not recommend that personally. So we do actually do a couple heavy attacks, but those are more tactical, or maybe I do 2 in a row in between an ability. And that is one of the reasons that I actually think this build is kind of like the lazy river. I'm going to call it the lazy Warden build, because it feels very lazy. If I don't want to try very hard, I play this class. When I play my Magicka Nightblade, I have to try. When I play this class, I can relax. I have enough mitigation and enough healing that I can just go through Cyrodiil and not have to worry about it that much. On Nightblade, that's not the case. I will go over why I have chosen these skills. I already went over why I've chosen the armor. Balrog is a no-brainer. You need Balrog. But everything else is pretty standard. Rallying Cry, that's your mitigation and damage. Damage from Scathing, and then you have more damage from Balrog. A lot of damage. And you use your class skills and game mechanics for survivability. Now, let's go over front bar. Shulks. This is your burst. I am not that good at Warden, I admit, though I have been pretty effective with this. Whenever I've done a 1v1 with a good player, though I can usually get them down at lower health, I'm never really able to finish it just because I suck at Warden. I am not very good at timing up Deep Fissure. I got the pressure, I got the damage, I just don't have the organization, the proper timing of it all. So if you can figure that out, then you can be better than me. Ta-da! Let's talk about this though. This is your source of breach. Easy. This also is an AoE, so, you know, undodgeable. Nice. This will also combo very well with Dawnbreaker, because guess what? They're both undodgeable. Yay! Roly-polies, beware. Moving on, both of these are AoE, right? That means this has excellent 1vx potential, and it does well in Battlegrounds. Force Pulse is also an AoE. Oh, and guess what? So is Growing Swarm. Oh, and guess what? So is Arctic Blast. Literally the only ability on this build that isn't AoE is, I guess technically, you're like this, which is like a self buff, Vigor, which is a self buff, and Leeching Vines, which is a self buff, but you can also put it on others. It's just not AoE. This is just a self buff, but I don't count this because whatever. This is also an AoE. All of your damage is AoE. Because of that, it is very potent for 1vx and killing roly-polies. Now I'm going to talk about why I'm using Force Pulse, aside from, you know, mentioning that, oh, AoE. One of the reasons I always use Crushing Shock is because it was cheaper and it was more consistent. The Force Pulse Sass effect thing, it wasn't always that consistent, but if you're using a charged Ice Staff, in addition with Glacial Presence, which increases the chance of applying chill to enemies with Winter's Embrace abilities by 200%, you'll get roughly 100% chance of applying chilled with Arctic Blast, because this ability has a very high chance by Arctic Blast. It does damage to an enemy. So make sure you're within 6 meters, and that way you're able to apply chilled. Force Pulse, I have never seen Force Pulse bounce between enemies more than I have on this build. It is glorious. It feels so fucking good. So when you're using Force Pulse, that is when you're gonna get Scathing Mage to proc. So hammer that shit. After you get Shulks and Dawnbreaker and Arctic Blast and Growing Swarm, I'll talk about that in a second, hammer the fuck out of Force Pulse. You will go far. It is great, it's fun, it's juicy, all the adjectives. Growing Swarm. I picked this on Deltia's website, because I looked at other websites to see what people were doing, and then I make what works for me. When I looked at their website, Deltia's justification for using the stamina version of this was that it alleviated your Magicka sustain, which is technically true, although you're only casting this every 20 seconds. having a stamina ability in your rotation that isn't a magic ability will technically, in the long run, make your magic sustain better. However, though his recommendation is good, I disagree with his reasoning. His reasoning is what I just said. My reasoning is because this is AoE. I said it, it's AoE. Everything is AoE. So, though this will only apply minor vulnerability to one target, it will then cause bleed damage in a circle around it. So it's pretty effective. Also, single target bleed damage has the chance to proc hemorrhage, which is a status effect, which will work well with Force Pulse. So again, more status effects, Force Pulse, big juicy AoE damage. I think the only thing that really doesn't apply a status effect here is Dawnbreaker, which it technically can, it just doesn't most of the time. I already mentioned Arctic Blast. This is kind of a weird ability. It has a stun applied to it, attached to it, so this is technically your stun, but it's also technically your burst heal. But it's also technically an AoE damage over time. It's a weird skill. It's not the best burst heal, but because Warden has a bunch of other sources of mitigation and healing, it's fine. You can just make sure you're doing everything else right. Blast will also be right. Also, I fuck up all the time, and I'm still able to use Arctic Black twice. Arctic Black twice. And then I go Vigor, and then I make sure all my other buffs are up. Make sure Betty Netch is up, or Betty. Make sure Betty's up. Hey Betty. And make sure your other buffs are up, you'll be fine. Leeching Vines also helps with the passive healing. I'll get into the passive healing in a bit, and it's so important in a game like ESO. This is passive AoE damage, so cast this, see that I had a nice heal. That's going to be cut in half, so it's only going to be roughly 4k in Cyrodiil. 4k heal, not that great, but when you hear that, you also have other forms of passive healing. 4k heal plus the 2k heal of other kinds is roughly 6k, so that's something. That's not negligible. Plus you can also just block and then cast it, which will help with your mitigation. Also, that was a crit. Oh yeah, and it crits sometimes, so it's not the worst. It is the worst burst heal out of every class, but when I say it's not the worst, I mostly mean because you have other things to help compensate for it. This is our mobility ability. Mobility. You can use Vampire for Mist Form, Undeath. I don't think it's worth it, because Magic of Warden already has really shit sustain, and using Vampire is going to make that even more difficult. So I highly recommend that just use Bird of Prey. This will give you Minor Berserk, which is 3 damage. It gives you immobilization to snares, and it increases your movement speed for seconds, which is pretty good. Most sources of Expedition are like 4. 6 seconds is pretty nice. One thing to consider though is that because we have Expedition, this is one thing I've noticed, is that I have 2 pieces of Divines here. I want to make these well fitted. Because your source of mobility is using this and then sprinting, you probably want more well fitted, whereas say well shitted, but well fitted is actually good now. I don't really have any well fitted. I need to fix that. I have one well fitted. It's something for you to tweak on your own. These are minor adjustments that you probably want to make for yourself. Dawnbreaker. Extra passive damage on your front bar. In addition to that, it's AoE, undodgeable, it's a stun. It combos well with Fisher. It's a classic, what can I say? On our back bar, you have 2 options for ultimate. I'll go over that in a bit, but we got Betty Netch. This is going to give us our sustain. It also gives us a Major Brutality and Major Sorcery. So this is why we can use Tripods in conjunction with Lotus Blossom. So with these 2 abilities, I can use Tripods, which is really nice because Jewels of Misrule and then Tripods. Again, I use Jewels of Misrule as a food. I've also tried Witch Mothers, don't like it. Leeching Vines, very important skill. Not because of the healing that it does, although that is not something, but the passive healing you get from Minor Lifesteal is actually really nice. I find that when it comes to keeping myself topped up, having Leeching Vines on an opponent will really help with keeping my health topped up. In addition to that, we have Resolving Vigor and Ice Fortress. These 2 will give us our resistance buffs. This one has a heal attached to it, and this one has minor protection attached to it. These 2 make us very, very tanky, which is why I can be lazy on this character. I can just take my time, and I call it the Lazy Warden, because I just make sure my buffs are up, do a heavy attack every now and then to make sure I have magic, but also because you get the shield Also, when you heavy attack, you're going to get a roughly 2k heal because of Lotus Blossom. 2k plus that shield that you get, which isn't that much, but it's still something. 2k is what old Healing Ward used to heal for. So having 2k plus a shield happen at the same time is really fucking nice. And this will happen no matter which bar you're on. Then you have the damage mitigation, both in the form of Solve and Minor Protection. What's like you're not missing anything. I will show you the buffed up resistances. We're almost at resistance cap for spell resistance. For physical resistance, it's less. The reason we're so high on spell resistance is because of the light armor passives. Oh yeah, make sure you have all your passives. You probably want all the passives for your class and your and Destro and armor. Generally, I say pick passives that apply to combat. I'm putting that on you. You guys have to figure that out. So yeah, it's not too hard. Trial and error, you'll figure it. But light armor gives you spell crit, and then being a Breton, you also get spell resistance. And then when someone puts Elisus on me, and let's be honest, everyone is using Elisus, I get even more resistance. I am past resistance cap most of the time in PvP when I'm all buffed up. So that's just for spell damage. So no, I'm not taking any fucking spell damage. Physical damage, yeah, that hurts. But spell damage, I can shrug off a lot. Lotus, I was on this and this. Okay, Lotus Blossom. So this is another way to passively restore your health along with minor lifesteal. This is great if you're under pressure and you're like 1v. But this is probably what's gonna give you healing just day-to-day basis, you know, regular fight, because it's gonna last for 60 seconds, very economical. To heal you for almost 1,000 every time you light attack. It does have a chance to crit, and if you're in a group, it will also act as a sustain ability. Here's Gift, regain 250 magicka and stamina, whichever. And this effect can occur every 1 second. So every 1 second, that's a lot. That's basically your GCD. So, you know, light attack, every light attack, as long as you're weaving, you're gonna get stuff back. But this only, I'm pretty sure this only works on like when you're grouped or if you're healing an ally. So solo, this isn't gonna affect you, but if you have anyone around you, if you're grouped, it will definitely affect you. In addition to that, we get crit from this, so this plus this equals, I can use tripods. Now, you have two options for your ultimate on your back bar. You have Northern Storm, and I will explain my reasoning for that in a second, but the other one, which is probably what most of you should try, unless you, actually, even if you run with a group, you might want to try this. Enchanted Forest. This is your kind of defensive ultimate. You can just put this down, hump a pillar, hump a wall, run around a tower. This will help you not die. It's pretty cheap. It's kind of like Resto Ult. It is stationary though, so you kind of have to make sure you're running around in it, but the radius is pretty big, so. If a target in there is, if the initial heal is on a target with below 50 health, you get 20 ultimate refunded. So if you're below 50 health when you use this on yourself, it kind of only costs like 70 ultimate, which is less than in-cap. Actually, no, I think that's the same as in-cap. But yeah, technically it costs 90 to use, but if you're using it under that condition, it's very cheap. Even though it's pretty cheap. So the reason I use Northern Storm occasionally, again, I sometimes change this out, is that, remember earlier when we were talking about having a charged weapon increases our chance of status effects, and then also Glacial Presence increases our chance of status effects? It's not the same as Arctic Blast. This has a unique modifier to the chance to apply Chilled. However, with the charged weapon, plus Glacial Presence and Northern Storm, we will still have a really high chance to proc Chilled in an AoE area. This is 10 meters around you, versus Arctic Blast, which is only 6 meters around you. If you're fighting a big group, and you don't have to worry about them being stunned, so like if you have a friend using Dawnbreaker, then they use Dawnbreaker and you use Northern Storm. Not only will this give you both major protection, but it'll give you extra weapon and spell damage. It'll decrease their movement speed, and it has a pretty high chance to apply Chilled, which again means your Force Pulse, your main spammable, and what you use to proc Scathing Mage will bounce between a whole bunch of targets. You know, what's more to say? A lot of AoE damage. If you are doing a duel, would consider using the Bear. I don't think the Bear is worth using in 1vx, but in certain environments the Bear is definitely worth using. Otherwise, those are really the only ultimates I'd suggest. Don't use Meteor. I've seen some websites out there that suggest using Meteor. Don't do that. Use Dawnbreaker, use Northern Storm. Get in, get out. As a Warden, you have range, but you also have survivability, and some of your abilities are melee. So you can get tanky and you can get in the fray, but if someone runs away, you can also use your ranged abilities to help finish them off, or, you know, pull aggro. I mean, they're players, so you're not really pulling aggro, but you are getting their attention. So, you know, with this build, you are tanky enough to kind of just take it easy, to just do a few heavy attacks, to heal yourself. It's like clockwork. When I play this build, I just buff up, go to my front bar, and then mindlessly spam Force Pulse, keep all my buffs up, and then I go to my back bar and do the same thing. I have enough healing and survivability where I don't have to worry that much. So if you're a newer player to this game, want a simple build, but Oaken Soul is, you know, it's not that effective in PvP. So this is what I recommend for you. It's simple, it's effective, don't die because you're a Warden. Have any questions, feel free to leave them in the description, or not description, comments. Because I'm not a huge YouTuber or streamer, I actually have the, I'm in the fortunate position where I can answer basically every question that comes. I would prefer questions be about the build and not what are your favorite color. It's red, by the way, in case you haven't seen my Nightblade. But if you have any questions about the build, I'm happy to help you with it. If you're on PC NA, I'm also happy to help you with it in-game. Keep in mind, though, Nightblade is my expertise, not Warden. So I'm not quite as good at Warden. I just know how to theory craft and build things. And honestly, even though I'm not that good at Warden, this build is still really, really fun. You get the dopamine from the big numbers and all that AoE and just all the numbers on screen. It's a lot of fun. And I highly suggest you try it and let me know what you think of it. Take care.